Welcome to Money Isn't Everything. I'm Mary Wisniewski, Cornerstone Advisors, editor-at-large. Every other week, we bring on a guest that is shaking up financial services in some way, and we get into the why, how, and the possibilities. This episode is in conversation with Jim Bruene, who I first met years ago when he was very early into his creation of Finovate, and he schooled me in home banking. Today, weeks ahead of Finovate, we're getting into how to stay creative in a really freaking rigid industry, some of the fun backstories of developing Finovate years ago, and small business banking possibilities. Jim, welcome to Money Isn't Everything. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So when I came up with this concept, I was like, I have to talk to Jim, and I have to talk to him very quickly because I want his point of view to set the tone for this show, because you are someone who founded a fintech event when most people wouldn't even know what fintech was. And you also followed digital banking, I think, well ahead of anybody I knew at the time. So I think it's really great to have you here to share some of the perspectives you learned while being so early into this wild world that it's become. So I want to take you back into time. I remember on one of our earlier interviews that we had together, I believe, you were telling me that when you first started, you'd tell people you were in bank marketing, and people would look confused, like, oh, what do you market? Am I remembering this right? Or tell me a little bit about that experience. Yeah,
it's exactly true. I think I would have different titles. Sometimes I'd say I work in bank products or bank marketing, and everybody would just have a blank stare, which I always thought was interesting. They didn't think that there was anything. There was products or could be any kind of a marketing approach to something as plain as banking, I guess. So that's a good reality check that you're not in a fancy business.
You're not in a fancy business. Well, you are sort of, but it's what year was that, Jim, when that was happening?
Well, I started in 1988. Was my first foray into banking. So that's when I learned that no one really wanted to hear what my job was.
Do you think that's still true today? Do you think people realize now, like if you said, hey, I focus on bank marketing, certainly the industry knows, but do you think it has a little bit more universal appeal?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe it's just from thinking about it for 40 years, but I feel like people understand that there's marketing involved. I think they can see that now through just all the different financial services that people see so much of. So I think it might be a little bit more accepted now. And also, you can say fintech, and that helps. But that's still not considered banking, I don't think, by most.
Not by most, but you'll hear certain people say, in time, fintech will become banking. But I mean, I know that's like a controversial point of view, and some people say the opposite. So,
yeah.
But before we go into that, I wanted to pull up an old blog that you wrote that's now on Finovate, but it must have been on NetBanker.
Yep,
but it was
was the first.
You posted on January 5th, 2004, and I thought it was so interesting because you were just listing the top innovations. So I want to set the tone, not only like what was Jim doing with bank marketing, but some of these innovations are just so funny. I'll just name the first one. May 1995, Wells Fargo is first in the world to offer web statement access. I mean, That's wild because it points to the fact that people were relying on the paper statements to understand their money.
I know, and I mean, and most people listening probably don't remember. You relied either on the paper that came, 2 weeks after the close, or most of the people would call and you listen to your account, audio. That was really what people did that were, especially younger people that were maybe living paycheck to paycheck. You were just calling on the phone all the time and going through the menus and listening to your data come at you.
And that's probably hard to listen to,
It is.
I'm just thinking about it, being like,
have you ever called? Have you ever done it? Have you ever even had to do that?
You know what? We should do that. I haven't done that in a while, but I remember when there's a security thing and they'll be like, is this your transaction? Yeah. I'm like, oh gosh, I guess it is my transaction or not, as the case may be. Well, I want to talk, how did you see this moment? How did you see a moment where you're like, when this wasn't really a thing yet, and then you're like, hey, let me do this wild thing and start something called Finovate. What was the thinking process there, Jim?
Well, I was lucky enough to get into the online banking section at U.S. Bank in 1992, which was
Hmm.
very much of a pioneer. When we were working with Microsoft, getting online banking into Microsoft Money, their PFM software. So I got lucky to see it at the very beginning, and it was pre-internet, and it still was really interesting at the time because people were talking about getting dialing in through AOL or through message boards or CompuServe, that kind of thing, or just directly you could directly dial into the bank through money software at the time. So it was interesting, but it was really hard because everybody had to load software and use modems and all this kind of thing. It wasn't there. The ease of use was horrible at the beginning, and
Well, it
then
sounds
luckily
horrible.
it was, but you could see that people were starting getting excited about it because this is my origin story. I was working in a bank in 1994 in online banking, and I see in the American Banker magazine that 2/3 of the banks say they're going to look into or start something in online banking in the next 5 years, and so that's when I decided to go solo and write a newsletter about it. God, there's a lot of interest, but it was pre internet, and then internet came in 1995, and then everything just exploded. I was so lucky that that happened. The Netscape Navigator.
You were lucky, but you also you sent something before other people, and that's what I really want to drill into that because I think these are the lessons to like really think about now as fintech funding has been dialed back a bit, and like I know the budget is the budget, but I'm playing around with this segment for this podcast, and I'm going to do it for you too, and that's what you said. I want to like
Oh, good.
quote quote back things you said, but this one's interesting because and don't you worry, I don't normally keep a file on people, but I remember we had an interview where we talked about this, and I don't think this made the final cut. But you said this. I have a note of this. So you said the things I could think of seemed bigger than the reality is of you need to write this like thing for a brochure. That was one thing. And then another
Yeah,
thing, the whole magic dries up when bills start to come in. It's hard to meet expectations for pioneering things. I think that would be the case anywhere. Um,
yeah.
and I just feel like this is like so glad you said that then. I wonder if you feel the same now, but I think, we're in a climate now where like, the pressure's on more to like cut creative ideas at a bank or at a credit union. But I'm just curious how you navigate that tension of like, oh, you want to try something new, but then you're in this bigger corporation. So there's like all these rules and it's easy to have your ideas killed or turned in a way you wouldn't have them done.
I got my start working inside these big companies, and I did get a little frustrated with some of the speed. Luckily, I was in the kind of an R&D area, so it was better than some other areas. But I saw the industry go through that boom bust cycle, a couple times, but especially when everybody was so excited from 1995 to 2000, and then everybody was completely disillusioned by it. You didn't even you were the rock star at a bank or wherever if you were in the internet area in 1999 2000, and then it was a death place to be, horrible place to be in 2001 through 2005. It
Yeah.
was really, I just thought it was bizarre because it hadn't, the whole banking as delivered online hadn't changed between 1999 and 2001, but the whole mindset really crashed. So it really set back the industry for 5 or 6 years. So I think we've gone through that cycle a little bit recently, but not quite
Not to
as
that extreme.
let's back to the beginning. Let's not invest as much maybe now, but for a while there, it was don't invest anything for about 5 years.
I mean, any advice to someone working at a corporation that is feeling fed up with their ability to try something new?
Well, yeah, just try to come up with something that you can prove there's some revenue to. That's they may not be your vision for the future, but if you can show some kind of a revenue path, profit path in the next couple of years, that's what I was always trying to do. Is I just lived in a spreadsheet, always trying to show that if we make these improvements, that they're for 5 years it pans out. So always trying to be real tangible and cash flow and so forth on projects. But it definitely gets frustrating.
Yeah, super frustrating. I imagine even when I've been at bigger companies, I'm like, oh man, get out of my way.
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Um, yeah.
It doesn't always work. I definitely had some things that maybe even entered into my long-term record that weren't so positive, as an employee. It helped me start my own business, that's for sure.
Well, but those things become motivating.
That's true.
Well, I know you just mentioned like proving the path of like this could make money, but I also remember us talking a lot about like features that would be useful. And so I'm dating us, but I think I'm just starting to see it come out for certain banks. Like I remember us talking about searching transactions, like the ability to just search for your transactions. I'm still noticing when a bank announces that because it's still not, I don't think it's typical, but you tell me if it's typical at this point.
It doesn't seem like it would be difficult at all, because the actually the most of the data that you have on, inside of you could have, 30 years of data on your accounts, and it's hardly any information, and it's hardly any bandwidth. It's just, a couple megabytes of data. So it seems like it should be relatively easy to search, but that's taken so long. Because as soon as Google came out, whenever you started using Google, 2001 or two, whatever that was, you could see, how easy that if Google could search the entire web, that you ought to be able to search your bank account. If not equal, at least in the same ballpark. But that has taken a long time.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. That's like interesting because, it seems so simple. Why not? Why not? What do you think why is that so long?
I think it probably doesn't get to the top of every customer's list, because I think, at least for a long, long time, people were the customer was happy to be able to see their data, like you take your paper statement and it's instantly visible to you online. So that was such a
Mhm.
great improvement over what you had before, where you had to wait till it came in the mail or whatever. And then so this metaphor of a paper statement, made people happy for a long time. And then, you couldn't search your paper statement, and the fact that you couldn't easily search your online statement, I think, just made sense to people. They weren't something they were clamoring for. And so I just don't think, I mean, even though everybody working on it or, using it would say that's a good idea, it doesn't rise to the point of, a customer is going to leave the bank because, the ease of search isn't there. So that's a lot of thing when you have captive customers, that they're, these things, these little features aren't, uh, you're not going to lose customers over them. So it's hard to make a business case. Let's spend $50,000 or $100,000 or $500,000, whatever, to improve our transaction search when there's not a real ROI on it. I think that's always a problem. I wish that online banking had evolved with with fees on it, instead of it just became all free. There hasn't been premium accounts or gold accounts or anything that anybody paid for. So the P&L internally, or the ROI internally, is always tough, because there's no direct fees paid for anything. So that's always been something. Everything is always, you have to justify it, without any revenue, direct revenue.
Well, you're really screwing up the premise of my show, Jim. Money isn't
Uh
everything. But I will forgive it because
oh.
it's true. But I really wish the industry would get to a point where someone would dump their bank because their search was crappy. You know what I mean? Like I wish that's how high stakes these things were, because like it feels like it should be, but like as you say, if the pressure's not there, why would they do it? But I do want, from your perspective, do you think fintech has improved banking? Um, well, we'll just date it back to the first
Yeah.
Finovate.
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you think it has improved? And if so, in what area? Because people weigh in differently here.
Yeah. Oh, it's improved so much. I mean, and a lot of it, I think it took the mobile app to actually make the user interface so much better. So before, when you
Uh-huh.
were designing for the desktop, it was still this sort of paper statement, and you had all this real estate, and you could lay it out, in with all kinds of stuff everywhere. But once you had to shrink it to the mobile phone, I think that really made things a lot easier to use. Now that's not the advanced functions you're talking about, but it sure became all of a sudden easier to look at. And it was I always think that the for the first, we'll call it 15 years of online banking, it was very cluttered. The look and the names of everything and figuring out what to do, and there just wasn't very the easy use was poor. And now I think the easy use is good, if not great, just because people learned how to do it through mobile, beginning with mobile in 2007, 8, 10, 11, that kind of time. Actually, really after 2010 and 11, after the sort of financial problems got behind us and people could invest again.
Yeah, you're bringing me back to a memory I totally forgot about. But one of my first company phones was a BlackBerry, even though we were in an iPhone world. And it
Yeah,
was like
yeah.
an old model. And I was like, how does this work? I don't think I'm
You had a
seeing or
keyboard though, right?
experiencing. Yeah, I did
Yeah,
have a keyboard and it was resilient.
that
I
was
once fell into a
yeah.
fountain, and it was the one tech thing that survived that little splish splash incident. But
Oh, that
well,
sounds more interesting. Well, tell us about falling into the fountain.
I thought I could jump it. I was wrong. Things you learn in your early 20s. Um, but what about small business tools? Or what are some of the features you'd like to see either with small business, digital banking, or more general banking? I'm just picking small business because I know you have
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
expertise in it. But like, what do you think beyond holding money? Like, what's missing there, or what would you like to see?
Yeah, I always had a sort of interest in small business banking just because it's well, a couple of reasons. Because I was a small business starting in 1994
Yeah.
through my whole life basically. So I felt the pain, and then also there's so much more interesting things that you can do for a business. And again, about the money, the business customer has, uh, you're saving them money. There's an ROI for the business user that isn't there for the consumer. The consumer you're trying to make happy, and you're trying to help their, you're trying to improve their life. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's a great thing to do. But on the business side, you're helping them improve their life, improve their prospects, and they can see it easier, and therefore are willing to pay more, pay for it. And I always had said, as a small business owner, I would pay my bank, you know, a, I would say $500 a month if you gave me what I needed in
Wow.
all the banking kind of accounting world, all the numbers. If I would be happy to pay, hundreds of dollars a month.
Okay, I want to drill into this fee thing because it's a really important point because it's been exposed as a flaw with certainly the neobanks model of like not having the right revenue model, and of course they're trying to build a product that has broader reach to more consumers. So like this fee versus non-fee really is important to creating new experiences and products for consumers. So I feel like we're finally reaching a point where um, at least neobanking is coming to like, well, it's also controversial, but like a tipping model or a subscription fee. But you definitely are of the belief like one ought to pay for something in order to get like a good product, aka I'm not scamming you sort of thing.
Yeah, I just think it would help people. It would help people make better products faster than
Uh-huh.
I think that's all happening now. I mean, the challenger banks and all that created a competition where they were very focused on that that the digital experience is great, and so there was competition more than there had been. That pre whatever that started 10 years ago, maybe that era began. So I think that does really help. And so but I think customers would pay. I don't think they would pay for just anything like vanilla access. You can't really charge anybody to look at their data. But I think that you can and could and will be able to bundle, premium services and, better customer service, better security, this and that feature. I think that's still wide open for people to do.
Two thoughts here. One, you're reminding me of an old story that I didn't write, someone did, but it was like a bank branch charging people for people who came into the branch, which caused a big
Yeah,
fuss, of course, because
yeah, yeah.
that
That
should
really
cause a,
happened. I
a
remember
big
that.
fuss.
Yeah,
But to this idea of small business, I'm also really curious about like products that are useful to like gig workers, which often is sort of a small business owner in many ways, if not always. And I'm wondering, I mean, have you seen any interesting tools or anything for like people struggling with volatile income because of the way that they're paid through gigs or like
Yeah.
running a small business or yeah.
Yeah, there's at least I can't name which one, but there's at least one or two of the challenger banks have worked on moving up your pay your kind of like I mean it's like factoring. Like if you invoice someone, they give you the money right away, and where factoring is a big deal for bigger businesses generally, but they've scaled it down to more this. Small business, like the very, very small business, like a high end consumer kind of thing. So you get your money faster, but all the things that have been done to make the payment, the invoicing, and collecting your payments and following up on your payments, all those kind of tools being integrated into online banking. That's kind of a core thing that the small business challenger banks are doing right now. There's about 17 that are pure digital challenger banks in the United States. And I think that helps move the product cycle along better, that those companies are just really working on all the margins of trying to make the business experience better.
Yeah. Wow, 17, that's a better number than I would have thought. So that's already feeling promising.
Yeah, I mean, Mercury's the one of the big ones, and you see them a lot, but there's others too.
Jim, I want to walk back to Finovate just because I know by the time when this airs, it's going to be Finovate's around the corner. But when you first started, it was in the basement, right? You held it.
It was, yeah,
Yeah.
50 on Third Avenue and 54th Street in a basement, sub basement, and this is in the era of the first mobile phone, and you couldn't get mobile phone access in that sub basement. It was not a good thing for the people on stage. I think there was 16 presenters demoing, and 4 of them were mobile phones, and that wasn't a good thing.
Well, you got some feedback, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah,
And I like this headline, "Bankers in the Basement."
yeah.
But when you first were starting, were there bankers at the original Finovate?
Yeah, there were, and there was only 170 chairs in this auditorium, and we sold it out, and then we added another room, so you had to watch it on a feed from a separate room, and so we put 30 or 40 people in that, and then I still remember that, but we had to turn people away, and I remember that Citibank was one of them. They wanted to
Oh,
all of a
wow.
sudden they wanted to send over their like emerging products team of 5 people, and we had to say no
Wow.
to their to Citibank and their money and everything at the very first one. That hurt. So, but yeah, it was probably half bankers to maybe 2/3 bankers. It was definitely attracted. I mean that was that was the audience that we were really trying to attract.
What did Citi say when you're like, sorry?
They 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 didn't
You
really
didn't make the cut
they didn't
list.
really they didn't really understand that was a serious thing. Took a little
Yeah,
convincing,
you bounced him out.
but
So
yeah,
that's like a,
yeah,
well,
I
now
know. Yeah.
there's so many fintech events, and I feel like what's happened, or at least it feels like it's happened, is that you know bankers, they don't really know where to go, or they don't really know where to go to source new ideas, or be like, I really want to find something interesting, or meet up with a partner that could be really compelling for us both. Like I feel like there's this like it's saturated and there's this confusion of like where to go. And I'm just kind of curious if you were to recommend someone who really authentically wants to know what's the latest and greatest out there, what would your advice be to like seek out fresh thinking?
Well, I mean, I think that conferences in general are
Hmm.
fantastic for just being able to open up your mind. So it's not, there's quite a few choices, but I think the more important than maybe the exact one you go to is that you go to some conference, because you get to maybe less today than back in the day, where you could get away from your phone and work and all that, and just be in a different space, a different headspace where you could think about things. And then you always have the plane ride back and all the the brainstorming you can do coming home. So I think that I've always loved conferences for that. ability to just sort of, reset your brain and think about things that you wouldn't otherwise, and all the things that you run into. So, I mean, obviously my experiences with Finovate, that's still a great place to go. And Money 2020, you can't go wrong there if you want to run into new ideas. But there's also, other, there's quite a few that have a good digital programs.
Jim, I'm having this. You like theater, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. It doesn't have to be theater, but have you ever had like a business idea while you've been doing a different activity, either seeing a play or musical or what have you? Have you ever been like, oh, this is very different from my everyday, but I could apply it to my work in some way?
Yeah, I used to, I used to love to go to the ballet with my
I love
wife,
that.
and
Yeah.
I know, and I would sit there and I would brainstorm the entire ballet. I love the music, and it's just a peaceful thing, and I would just come out of there with, I just, 3 hours straight of idea, generation. So that was I always loved doing that.
See, that's cool. So that's another tip.
Yeah,
Try,
go to the
go,
ballet.
try, go to the ballet.
You need
Certainly,
you
I
need
will
that.
go to the ballet.
It's the music part of it. Go if you went to the Broadway play, you have to pay attention to the plot. But I like it where you can
Hopefully.
just where it's more just musical. Yeah, well, yeah, that's the idea.
Well, Jim, I have one last question for you, but before I ask it, for those who want to get in touch with you, is there a best way to reach out to you or find you, or you say
I
you're
still
join
I
city where I'll say no?
yeah, I have a website, Fintech Labs, where we keep track of conference calendars and also some small business digital banking. And so it's Jim at fintechlabs.com.
Wonderful. And Jim, my last question for you is, what is the photo on your lock screen of your phone?
Well, it was my mom's artwork, and I just switched it to a rotating, like where it grabs a picture out of your camera
Oh,
and
yeah.
changes it every day. I just did that yesterday, so
Uh,
I have two answers.
what made you want to change it up? To be
I
surprised?
don't know. I thought I'd give that a shot. Like, what if it just threw a different picture at you every day? How interesting that would be. But I kind of miss my mom's artwork on there. So Mom, I'm going to switch back to you.
Yes. Well, Jim, thanks so much for being on Money Isn't Everything. A pleasure to speak with you. So thanks today for your time.
Thanks, Mary. I look forward to another time.
Okay, so the biggest thing I learned in conversation with Jim today is that anyone can be turned down anywhere, even a banker at a bank tech event. And frankly, I find that reassuring. And secondly, one of the biggest barriers to rethinking traditional products very well might be the business model. You enjoyed the show, and I really hope you did. Give me a rating and a review. It's the #1 way to get the show out into the world in front of people like us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I don't want you to miss the next episode dropping in 2 weeks with the founder of Debbie. I'll catch you then.